The enemy commander looked through his scope at 12 American Rangers moving through his kill zone and smiled. He keyed his radio and said 7 words to the men hidden in the rocks above. Let them walk in, then close the door. He had spent 3 days building this trap. He had 7 of the best snipers in the region positioned in a perfect ring across Korvac Ridge. No way in, no way out. And not one of those Rangers had any idea they were already dead. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Serpent smelled like bad coffee and old maps. 12 men crowded around a folding table under a single overhead light, and none of them were happy about what they were looking at. Captain David Walker stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed and his jaw set the way it always got when he was already calculating variables and not liking the numbers. He was 34 years old, 10 years in the Rangers, and he had learned long ago that mission briefings that started with the phrase light resistance almost always ended with something that was not light and not simple. Korvac Ridge, he said and tapped the map. Intel says we've got a communications hub operating out of a fortified position approximately 6 kilometers in from the eastern access point. Small garrison, rotating guard schedule. Intel classifies this as low to moderate resistance. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, standing to Walker's right, let out a short breath through his nose. That was the closest Chen ever got to laughing at something that wasn't funny. He was the team's second in command, 31 years old, built like someone had assembled him specifically to carry heavy things over difficult terrain without complaint. He had 2 tours in Afghanistan before Korvac, and he trusted his instincts more than he trusted any piece of paper that used the word moderate. Low to moderate, Chen repeated quietly. Sure. I know, Walker said. He didn't look up from the map. But those are the orders, and we've got a 12-hour window. We move at 2100, hit the ridge by 0300, neutralize the hub, and extract by first light. Derek Lawson, the team's point man, was leaning against the far wall with his helmet already strapped and his rifle slung across his chest. He was 26, the youngest Ranger on the team, and he carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had been told he was talented so many times that he had started to believe it without question. He scanned the room with sharp eyes, and then his gaze landed on the corner near the door. There was a woman standing there. She was not seated at the table. She was not reviewing the map. She was standing slightly apart from everyone else, her back almost to the wall, holding a tablet loosely in one hand and watching the briefing with a stillness that was almost unnerving. She was maybe 30, medium height, with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid and gray eyes that caught the overhead light in a way that made them look almost silver. She wore standard-issue fatigues with no unit patch and no rank insignia beyond a specialist designation. Strapped to her back was a radio communications pack. On her hip, a standard-issue pistol. That was it. No rifle, no tactical kit, just a radio and a sidearm. Lawson looked at her for a second. Then he looked at Chen. Then he looked back at her. "Who's the comms girl?" he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Walker glanced up from the map. "Specialist Hart. She's been attached to the team for this op. Communications support." "We got Rivera for comms," Chen said, gesturing toward Corporal James Rivera, who was seated at the table and already not making eye contact with anyone. "Rivera's going to be running the secondary relay from the extraction point," Walker said. "Hart handles primary field comms. She's got experience with the encryption protocols on the new hardware." Command's decision. Chen looked at the woman again. She had not reacted to any of this. Not to Lawson's comment, not to the back and forth about her role, not to being discussed like she wasn't standing 8 feet away. She just kept watching the map with those quiet gray eyes, and something about that stillness was faintly irritating to Chen in a way he couldn't immediately name. "You cleared for the terrain?" he asked her directly. She looked at him. "Yes." "You had mountain ops before?" "Yes." "You comfortable with a 6-kilometer push in the dark or over unstable ridge terrain?" "Yes." Chen waited for more. She didn't offer more. He turned back to the table and made a decision that he would later recognize as the wrong one. He dismissed her entirely. Lawson made the same decision faster and with less internal deliberation. He leaned toward Corporal Tommy Burke, who was seated next to him, and said quietly, "Command sent us a radio, girl. 6 clicks up a ridge in the dark, and we're babysitting a radio girl. Burke said nothing. He was 28, careful, and had a better developed instinct for when to keep his mouth shut than Lawson did. He glanced at Elena Hart once, and something about her stillness gave him a small, uncomfortable feeling that he couldn't explain, and so he filed it away under things to pay attention to later. Elena Hart said nothing. She looked back at the map. She had heard everything. She always heard everything. The thing about being invisible, she had learned, was that it was useful. People who did not see you as a threat spoke freely around you. People who dismissed you told you exactly what they were thinking without realizing they were telling you anything at all. And people who underestimated you gave you time, the most valuable commodity on any battlefield, to think without anyone watching. She had been invisible for 2 years. It had taken effort at first to maintain, to slow herself down, to pack away the instincts and the muscle memory and the calculating, quiet part of her brain that was always reading terrain, reading angles, reading the invisible geometry of distance and line of sight that most people never thought about at all. She had done it because she needed to, because the alternative was to keep being who she had been, and who she had been had cost her something she could not get back. But standing in that briefing room, looking at the map of Korvac Ridge, something was moving underneath the surface of her stillness. Not quite alarm, not quite fear, something older and quieter than both. She studied the topographic lines on the map, the narrow passes, the ridgeline elevation changes, the way the eastern access point funneled into a natural corridor between 2 high walls of rock. She had seen terrain configured like this before. Not here, somewhere else, a long time ago in a different mountain range under a different sky. She had survived it, others had not. She looked at the access point on the map and made a precise, automatic calculation that she did not share with anyone in the room. Then she picked up her tablet and she went back to being invisible. At 2100 hours, 12 rangers and 1 communications specialist moved out of FOB Serpent under a moonless sky. The first hour of the push was uneventful, in the way that all first hours are full of the particular vigilance that eventually settles into a rhythm, the team finding its pace, the terrain becoming familiar through repetition of step and breath and the quiet weight of gear. Walker moved at the head of the column with Lawson on point, 20 meters ahead. Chen held the center. Elena moved mid-column between Corporal Santos and Private First Class Danny Okafor, who was 19 years old and on his first real combat operation and was working very hard to look like he had done this before. She noticed that immediately about Okafor. She noticed the way he gripped his rifle slightly tighter than the veterans around him. The way his breathing was just a fraction too controlled, like someone counting to keep themselves calm rather than breathing naturally. She said nothing about it, but she positioned herself close enough to him that if something happened, she would be nearby. The terrain steepened at the 90-minute mark. The path narrowed. Loose shale shifted underfoot, and the rangers moved to single file, each man watching the footfall of the man ahead of him. Elena watched the rocks. Not the footfalls. The rocks. There were things about the terrain that did not fit. She had been cataloging them since the first 10 minutes of the push, adding them to a list in the back of her mind, with the quiet, methodical precision of someone who had been trained to notice exactly these things and had never fully stopped being that person despite 2 years of trying. The first thing she noticed was the brass. It was a single spent casing half buried under a flat rock near the left edge of the path at the 2-kilometer mark. Someone else might have stepped over it without registering it. Elena saw it in the split second her boot passed within 6 inches of it, and she noted its position and its age recent, within the last 48 hours based on the oxidation level, and she noted that it was from a caliber heavier than anything the garrison at the communications hub would typically field for perimeter work. She noted it and she kept moving. The second thing she noticed was the rock formations on the eastern ridge line above them, not the rocks themselves and the negative space between them. There were positions, their natural hides, that a trained sniper would recognize immediately, and an untrained eye would walk past without a second glance. She counted 3 of them in the first visible stretch of the ridge above the path, and her mind did the calculation before she consciously asked it to field of fire, elevation advantage, angle of engagement to the corridor below. Her stomach tightened. She kept moving. Her face stayed neutral. The third thing she noticed was the silence. Not the absence of conversation the team was maintaining, Noise discipline. The silence of the mountain itself. No birds. No small animal movement disturbing loose stones on the slopes above them. Nothing. The kind of absolute quiet that only settles over terrain when something in it has already frightened every living creature that had the option to leave. At the 3-kilometer mark, Elena moved forward in the column until she was walking beside Staff Sergeant Chen. "Sergeant," she said quietly. "Hart." He didn't look at her, sure eyes on the terrain ahead. "I need you to hear something." "I'm listening. This terrain is wrong." Now he looked at her. His expression was patient in the particular way of someone who is being patient because it costs them nothing and they expect to dismiss what they're about to hear. "Wrong how?" "The configuration of this corridor," she said. "The elevation of the ridgelines on both sides. The way the path narrows ahead, I can see it on the topo. It gets tighter for another 400 meters before it opens up again. That 400-meter stretch is the lowest point of the approach, and it has the worst escape geometry I've ever seen outside of a deliberate ambush site." Chen stopped walking, just for a second. Then he started again. "Intel cleared this route." "Intel cleared a route based on aerial observation and signals intercept," she said. "Aerial observation doesn't see spent brass on the ground. It doesn't see pre-positioned natural hides at elevation. It doesn't notice that there are no animals moving on a ridge that should have wildlife movement at this temperature and time of night." Chen was quiet for 3 full seconds. She counted. "You're reading a lot into a quiet mountain," he said. "I'm reading a lot into several specific observable details that individually could be explained away, and together suggest that someone has spent time on this ridge recently in positions that have direct line of sight to this corridor." "How recently?" 48 hours or less, probably less." Chen looked at her in the darkness. She could feel him recalibrating, not his assessment of the danger, not yet, but his assessment of her. She could see him trying to place her to find the category that explained why a communications specialist was reading terrain signatures like a trained sniper. She let him look. She gave him nothing. "I'll mention it to Walker at the next mark," he said finally. "I'd rather you mention it now," she said. His jaw tightened slightly. "I'll mention it at the next mark, Hart." She dropped back to her position in the column. She had made the report. That was what she could do. She could not make them listen. She had learned that too, that the report and the response were 2 separate things, and only one of them was within her control. But she adjusted her own positioning in the formation, quietly, without asking permission or explaining why. She moved herself 2 steps closer to the left edge of the path, closer to what cover was available, and she unclipped the retention strap on her sidearm, and she thought about the distance to the nearest rock formation that could provide concealment. She thought about all of this with the calm, mechanical clarity of someone who had done it so many times that it required no emotional involvement whatsoever. Danny Okafor glanced at her sideways. He had noticed her movement. "You okay?" he whispered. "Fine," she said. "Stay close to cover on your left." He blinked. "What?" "Don't move into the center of the corridor more than you have to. Keep as close to the left wall as the terrain allows." He stared at her for a second. Then something in her tone, or maybe in her eyes, which were no longer quite as still as they usually were, made him nod without asking a second question. At the 4-kilometer mark, Walker halted the column for a scheduled radio check and a water break. Elena moved forward through the standing men until she reached Walker. "Captain," she said. Walker looked at her with the mild surprise of a man who had largely forgotten she was there. "Specialist. I flagged this with Sergeant Chen, and I want to flag it with you directly. I believe this route has been compromised. I believe there are pre-positioned shooters on the ridgelines above us, possibly multiple, and I believe we are currently inside an engagement corridor that has been intentionally prepared." There was a brief silence. Lawson, standing nearby, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Based on what?" Walker asked. "Spent brass at the 2-kilometer mark, natural hides at elevation with direct fire angles to this corridor. Complete absence of wildlife movement on terrain that should have it. And the configuration of this approach, the narrowing of the path ahead, matches a standard kill zone geometry that anyone with sniper doctrine training would recognize." Walker looked at her. Then he looked at Chen, who gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug that communicated, "She said this to me too, and I don't know what to do with it." "Our intel cleared this route," Walker said. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you, the route shows signs of preparation that the intel didn't see." Lawson stepped closer. He kept his voice low, but he didn't keep the edge out of it. All due respect, specialist, you're a comms tech. You're carrying a radio and a sidearm, and you've been walking in the middle of the column for 4 hours. What exactly is your basis for a tactical terrain assessment? She looked at him. Her gray eyes were level and completely without apology. Experience, she said. Experience doing what? She paused for exactly 1 second. Then she said, reading mountains. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. She had given them what she could without giving them what she couldn't, and it had not been sufficient to change their direction. Walker made the call that any ranger captain would have made on the basis of the information officially in front of him. We hold the route, he said. We proceed on schedule. Hart noted and logged. If you see anything specific and immediate, you report it. Yes, sir, she said. She moved back through the column. She was now completely certain of what was ahead of them. She had been operating at a 70% certainty since the 2-kilometer mark. The conversation with Walker had not changed the terrain or the evidence. What it had changed was the math, the calculation of what she was going to have to do, not if something happened, but when. She had been avoiding that calculation for 2 years. She had been deliberately, consciously, carefully keeping herself in the category of person who did not make that calculation because she had decided she was no longer that person. She ran the numbers anyway. Her mind did it before she could stop it with the automatic precision of a mechanism that had been built for exactly this purpose and had never truly gone offline regardless of what she told herself. 7 hides, 3 confirmed from the ridge observation. Probable positions for the remaining based on standard sniper ring doctrine and the specific geometry of the corridor ahead. Elevation differentials, wind variables at altitude, distance from cover to target acquisition, time from first shot to last viable suppression window. Her hands were completely steady. She told herself that didn't mean anything. She told herself that she was still Elena Hart, communications specialist, attached personnel support role. She told herself this while she walked in the dark toward the part of the mountain that was waiting for them, and the part of her that had always known what she actually was walked with her in perfect silence, completely ready, watching everything. Okafor fell into step beside her again. He had stayed close since she told him to stay on the left wall. Smart kid. How much further to the hub? He whispered. 2 kilometers, she said. You really think something's wrong? She considered him for a moment. He was 19 years old. He had asked her a direct question, and he deserved a direct answer even if it was not the one that would make him comfortable. Yes, she said quietly. I think something is very wrong. He absorbed that. He gripped his rifle and shifted his weight slightly toward the left wall of the corridor, and Elena Hart kept walking, and the mountain ahead of them was completely, absolutely, perfectly silent. It had been silent for the last 30 minutes, and she had been counting. The silence lasted exactly 4 more minutes. Elena counted every second of it. Not because she was afraid. Fear was a different thing, a reactive thing, the kind that arrived after the fact and made your hands shake and your breathing go shallow. What she was feeling was older than fear and quieter. It was the particular awareness of someone who had spent years learning to read the space between what was visible and what was real, and who was now standing in a corridor where everything visible said one thing and everything real said something completely different. She kept counting. The rangers around her kept moving. The mountain kept saying nothing. At 02:14 hours, the column entered the narrowing. She had known it was coming for the last 600 meters. She had watched it approach on the topo in her memory, the way a driver watches a curve in the road from a quarter-mile out, not with surprise, but with the specific calibration of someone who understands exactly what the curve demands of them. The path pressed inward on both sides, the rock walls rising, the corridor shrinking to barely 8 meters across. Above them, the ridgelines climbed. And on those ridgelines, she knew 7 men were watching. Walker hand signaled the column to slow. Standard procedure entering a choke point. The Rangers tightened their spacing rifles up, eyes moving. Lawson was on point 20 meters ahead, moving in a half crouch along the left wall. Elena moved herself to the far left edge of the path, as close to the rock face as the terrain allowed. She kept Okafor in her peripheral vision. He had done exactly what she told him, stayed left, stayed close to cover, hadn't questioned it again. She filed that away. Smart kid. The first thing that changed was not a sound, it was a feeling. She had felt it before in a different mountain range, under a different sky the night before a mission that had ended in a way she spent the next 2 years trying to forget. It was a pressure in the air, almost physical, the sense of multiple sets of eyes acquiring target. She had been taught in a training room a long time ago that this feeling was not mystical. It was biological. The human nervous system, when trained to an extreme level of environmental sensitivity, could detect micro changes in air pressure and sound frequency that registered in the body before the conscious mind caught up. She had always thought that explanation was incomplete, but she had never been able to offer a better one. She pressed herself closer to the rock wall. 20 meters ahead, Lawson stopped. He had found something. He held up a fist and the column froze. Elena watched him crouch down and pick up something from the ground. He turned it over in his hand and she knew without seeing it clearly what it was. Another casing, or maybe something worse. A piece of equipment, something that didn't belong. Lawson held it up toward Walker with a look that was no longer entirely confident, and in the darkness she could see Walker's posture change just slightly, just enough the shift of a man recalibrating. Chen moved forward toward Walker. Elena stayed where she was. She was not watching Lawson or Walker or Chen. She was watching the ridgeline, and on the ridgeline something moved. It was nothing. A shadow. The suggestion of a shape that resolved itself into stone before her eyes could fully confirm what they had seen. Someone who hadn't spent years staring at elevated terrain looking for exactly this kind of not-quite movement would have dismissed it as fatigue or imagination. She counted the position. She counted the angle. She added it to the 3 she had already mapped. 4 down, 3 more to find. Walker, she said. She said it quietly, but she said it clearly, and she said it without waiting for permission to speak. Contact imminent, left ridgeline, 4 o'clock from Lawson's position, approximately 240 meters elevation. Every head in the column turned toward her. Walker looked at her. Specialist, I see movement at elevation. I cannot confirm it is hostile with certainty. I can confirm it is movement that does not fit the terrain pattern and is positioned at a natural height I flagged 30 minutes ago. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then the mountain opened up. The first shot came from above and to the right, and it didn't miss. Corporal James Rivera went down hard, his radio pack exploding off his back in a spray of shattered components, and the round that punched through it continuing through his shoulder and dropping him to the ground before anyone around him had processed the sound of the shot. Elena was already moving. She had not hesitated. She had not waited for her brain to give her the formal instruction to move. The part of her that had been waiting for this, the part that had been awake and fully operational for the last 4 kilometers of this walk, while the rest of her pretended otherwise, had simply taken over. She was at Rivera's position in 4 steps, pulling him toward the rock wall with one arm, while her other hand went to the wound. Entry wound high on the shoulder, exit clean, no arterial spray. He was screaming. She put her hand over his mouth, not unkindly, and said directly into his ear, "Through and through, you're not dying. Stop screaming. I need you to stop screaming right now." He stopped screaming. He started breathing very fast. "That's better," she said. "Hold this." She pressed his own hand to the wound. "Keep pressure. Don't move." The mountain was erupting around her. 2 more shots, then 3. They came from different elevations and different angles, which was exactly what she had expected and exactly what made the situation so geometrically catastrophic. The Rangers were pinned in a corridor with no vertical escape and fire coming from multiple overlapping positions. There was no single direction they could move to get out of every line of fire simultaneously. That was the entire design. Walker was on the radio. She could hear him calling for air support while Chen was pulling men toward what cover existed, which was not much. Lawson had gone flat behind a rock outcropping and was firing at the ridgeline above him, firing at nothing, she noted, at a position that was not where the shooter was. The muzzle flash suppression on the enemy rifles was excellent. He was guessing. They were all guessing. "There's no muzzle flash," Lawson shouted. "I can't find the shooter." "Because you're looking at the wrong ridgeline," Elena said. She had finished with Rivera and was moving along the base of the left wall, keeping her body against the rock, her eyes up. "The shot that hit Rivera came from 270. Your return fire is going to 315. Lawson stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Sound signature differential. The echo off the right wall hit approximately 40 milliseconds after the primary report, which puts the origin point across and above, not directly above. She said it the way you tell someone what time it is. Flat, certain, already moving on to the next thing. Chen grabbed her arm. How do you know that? She looked at him. Because I've been counting since we entered the corridor. Sergeant, I need you to listen to me. There are 7 shooters. This is a coordinated ring. They are positioned to cover every exit angle from this corridor. Standard suppression doctrine says we cannot move directly forward or backward without crossing at least 2 fire lanes. We need to identify and neutralize the ring before we can move. Chen's grip on her arm tightened. 7 shooters. You're certain? I'm certain of 4 positions. I have probable locations for 2 more based on the fire angle coverage required to complete the ring. I don't have the 7th yet. Another shot. Burke went down, not dead, but down around through his thigh that put him on the ground with a shout that cut off into a sharp, controlled grunt. He had training. He knew how to take a hit and stay functional. That helped. Walker was behind the cover with his radio, and she could hear him clearly now. Actual, this is Sierra 1-2. We are under fire at grid. He relayed the coordinates. There was a pause. Then she heard the response through the handset, even from 6 feet away, and the words that came back from the other end were the ones she had been hoping not to hear. Air support 90 minutes. Walker's face did not change in any way that could be called visible, but she saw what happened in his eyes. She had seen that particular look before in other faces in other corridors. It was the look of a man doing math that does not come out to a number he can accept. 90 minutes, with 7 snipers closing a ring around a 12-man element in a confined corridor. With 2 men already down and no viable escape route, they would not survive 40 minutes. Not like this. She knew that with the same certainty, she had known everything else about this mountain since the 2-kilometer mark. Walker put the radio down and looked at his men. Then he looked at Elena. His expression had changed. It was no longer the patient dismissal of earlier. It was something raw. What do we need? He said quietly. It was not the question she had expected. She took half a second to process it. He had just handed her the tactical floor, which was either an act of genuine crisis pragmatism or the kind of decision that only gets made when a man understands there is nothing left to lose by trying something he would never have considered 12 minutes ago. We need the positions of all 7, she said. I can get you 5 right now. 6 if the next shot gives me the data I need. The 7th I'll have to draw out. Draw out, Chen said, as in bait. As in create a condition that requires them to fire from a position they haven't yet revealed. She kept her voice level. We have a window. Snipers in a coordinated ring are operating on a fire discipline protocol. They are not all shooting simultaneously because that reveals all positions at once. They're rotating. It's tactical. It's also predictable. She paused. Then she said the things she had been building toward since she ran the numbers 4 kilometers ago. I need the SR-25. Complete silence. Even the mountain seemed to hold its breath for a half second between shots. The SR-25 designated marksman rifle belonged to Sergeant First Class Aaron Tate, who was crouched behind cover 8 feet away with a graze wound on his left forearm and a look on his face that said he had heard every word of this conversation and could not decide what to do with any of it. Lawson broke the silence first. She wants the rifle. He said it the way you say something that cannot possibly mean what it appears to mean. The comms girl wants the rifle. Elena did not look at Lawson. She looked at Tate. Tate looked back at her. He was 36 years old, and he had been in the Rangers long enough to have a particular kind of developed instinct that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the accumulation of near misses and close calls and moments where the only variable between survival and not had been the willingness to make an unconventional decision at the exact right time. He looked at her hands. Her hands were completely steady. He looked at her eyes. Her eyes were calm in a way that was completely inconsistent with everything else happening around them, and he recognized that calm because he had seen it before in other operators in other situations, where the fear had been replaced by something colder and more precise. You know how to use it, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. Long range, yes. Moving targets at elevation. Yes, She could see him making the decision in real time. She watched him arrive at it, and she saw the moment it landed, and he unstrapped the rifle from his back without another word and held it out to her. 400 rounds in the pack, he said. She drifts left at distance. Compensate. I know, she said. She took the rifle. The weight of it was familiar in a way that hit her somewhere she had been keeping locked for 2 years. Not nostalgia, not comfort. Something more complicated than either of those things. Something that felt like the closing of a circuit that had been open for a long time. She checked the chamber. She adjusted the scope. She found the first position on the ridgeline without raising herself above cover. She found it the way you find a word you've been trying to remember, not by searching, but by stopping and letting it arrive. Lawson said, "What is she doing?" Walker said, "Quiet." The second major burst of fire came down the corridor 60 seconds later. 3 shots in rapid succession from positions 2, 4, and 6 in her internal map. She tracked the reports, timed the intervals, confirmed the origin points with the scope angled from behind cover. 3 down from 7, 2 more she had already fixed. 1 remaining unknown. She had 5. She needed 6 before she could work the sequence. "Chen," she said. "Yeah. I need you to throw something into the open center of the corridor. Something with enough mass to sound like movement when it lands." Chen looked at her. "You want to fake a target?" "I want to draw fire from the 6th position. It has to be something they'll read as a person going down. Something that lands with weight." Chen pulled his pack. He stripped it of everything essential, ammo, medical radio, and he zipped it closed with the remaining dead weight of extra gear, and he looked at her, and she said, "Now," and he threw it in a hard arc out into the center of the path. It hit and rolled. The shot came from the upper left ridgeline. 0219 hours. She had the position in the scope before the echo finished bouncing off the right wall. 6 down. 1 more, Mom. "Here's the problem," she said, and her voice was entirely flat because they were past the point where any inflection served a useful purpose. "The 7th position is the most elevated. It's covering the extraction angles at the far end of the corridor. I can't confirm it without exposing myself, and I can't eliminate it from behind cover because the angle requires a clear line of sight." Walker was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Tell me what you need." 30 seconds and nobody else moves. He looked at his men. He looked at the 2 Rangers who were down and stabilized and not yet in danger of dying if this worked, and very much in danger of dying if it didn't. He looked at the corridor ahead of them and the mountain above them, and whatever he saw when he looked at Elena Hart in that moment, whatever recalculation was happening behind his eyes, it ended in one word. "Go," he said. She moved. She came out of cover low and fast, angling toward the far left wall, the SR-25 already up her eye at the scope before she was fully in position, her body reading the exposure geometry and adjusting in a way that was entirely automatic, entirely preconscious, entirely. The product of thousands of repetitions in training scenarios that she had spent 2 years trying to convince herself were part of her past. The 7th position materialized in her scope with the specific clarity that only came when everything else went quiet. She saw the shooter. He saw her. They had approximately the same amount of time. She fired first. The shot was at 280 meters uphill into a narrow natural hide. The wind was crossing left to right at approximately 12 kilometers per hour. The elevation differential required a hold adjustment of 6.2 minutes of angle. She made every one of those adjustments in the same half second that the 7th sniper was making his. The 7th sniper did not fire. She was back behind cover before the echo resolved. Her heart was beating very fast. She allowed herself to notice that. She allowed herself to feel the specific full-body aliveness of someone who had just done something that had been simultaneous and irreversible in both directions, and she sat with that feeling for exactly 3 seconds. Then she was back to work. 6 confirmed, she said, 1 remaining. The position I just identified is neutralized. I still need 1 more. The first position, the one I flagged at the 2-kilometer mark. He hasn't fired yet. He's waiting, Tate said. He was watching her with an expression that had moved well past surprise into something that she recognized but didn't have time to address. Fire discipline. He's the anchor of the ring. He goes last. Yes, she said, which means he's watching. He's watched everything I just did. And, Walker said, and he's adjusting, she said. He knows something changed. He's not sure what. He's going to wait until he has a confirmed target. She looked at the men around her. She looked at the corridor ahead. She looked at the position she had identified for the first shooter, 240 meters high, right behind a formation she had noticed at the 2-kilometer mark, and filed under the particular category of things she hoped she was wrong about. She was not wrong about any of it. She looked at Okafor. He was pressed against the left wall weapon, up watching her with the focused intensity of someone who had completely stopped trying to understand what was happening and had simply decided to follow wherever she pointed. "Stay where you are," she told him. "Don't move until I say." "Yes, ma'am," he said. Nobody corrected him. She looked back at the ridgeline, at the darkness above the natural hide, at the place where a very patient, very skilled shooter was sitting with his finger near a trigger, in his eye to a scope, in his absolute attention on the woman who had just taken apart 6 of his colleagues in 11 minutes. She could feel him watching her. That old pressure again. Multiple eyes down to one, but this one was the one who had been watching from the beginning. She thought about the last time she had been in a situation like this, about the last time a mission had come down to a single shooter in a single position, and the entire calculation of who lived and who didn't had compressed into the distance between her eye and a scope. She thought about her brother. She pushed that away. Hard. There would be a time for that. This was not it. She raised the SR-25, and she found the hide in her scope, and she waited. She was completely still. She did not breathe. She became exactly what she had spent 2 years telling herself she no longer was. The mountain waited with her. Above them on the ridgeline, the first shooter made his decision, and Elena Hart had made hers 3 seconds before he did. The rifle spoke once. The mountain went silent. The silence after the 7th shot was different from all the silences before it. It was not the silence of a mountain holding its breath. It was not the silence of men waiting for the next round to arrive from an angle they couldn't predict. It was the silence of 11 Rangers standing in a corridor where 7 men had just tried to kill them and had failed, and not one of those Rangers could fully account for why they were still breathing. Elena Hart lowered the SR-25. Her hands were steady. They had been steady through all 7 shots, and they were steady now, which was the part she didn't examine too closely, because she knew that if she examined it, she would have to acknowledge what it meant, and she was not ready to do that yet. She was still in the part of the sequence that required her to be operational. The other part, the part where she sat with what she had just done and what it meant about who she actually was, could wait. Walker was the first one to move. He crossed the corridor in 4 steps and stopped 2 feet in front of her and looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. It was not gratitude. It was not shock, basically. It was something closer to the look of a man who has just had his entire understanding of a situation revised in real time and is still completing the revision. "Rivera," she said before he could speak. "His shoulder needs a pressure dressing, and we need to get him stabilized for movement. Burke's thigh wound is going to be the bigger problem on the egress. That's a muscle tear, not a bleed out, but he can't bear full weight, and we're still 2 kilometers from the objective." Walker blinked. "You just eliminated 7 snipers." "Yes, and we still have a mission." She handed the SR-25 back to Tate. "Unless command is calling the op." Walker looked at her for another 2 seconds. Then he said, "Chen, get Rivera and Burke stabilized. We move in 6 minutes." Chen was already moving, but he was moving the way a man moves when his body is on autopilot and his mind is somewhere else entirely, which was the same way most of the Rangers in the column were moving. Lawson was standing completely still near the right wall, staring at Elena with an expression she recognized and didn't particularly care about. Okafor had his hand pressed to the side of his rifle and was looking at her like someone who had just watched a person walk on water and was trying to decide if it would be rude to ask how. Tate took the rifle back and settled it across his back, and then he looked at her steadily and said, "Who are you?" Not "what are you," not "how did you do that," "who are you?" She looked at him. "Hart," she said, "specialist, communications." "Try again," he said quietly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away back toward the corridor ahead, back toward the 2 kilometers of mountain that still stood between them and the objective. "Later," she said, 0231 hours. Rivera was on his feet, his right arm strapped tight against his chest, moving under his own power but wincing with every step. Burke had a field dressing on his thigh and was walking with a hard limp and the particular gritted teeth expression of someone who had made a decision about pain and was currently enforcing it. Walker had done a head count 10 mobile 2 limited 0 fatalities, and the arithmetic of that had visibly settled something in him. They had walked into a kill zone designed for their destruction, and they had walked out of it with their full complement alive. He knew exactly why that was. He was still processing what that meant. Chen fell into step beside Elena as the column reformed. He kept his voice low and level, the way he kept his voice when he was serious about something. "You counted the positions in real time," he said, "in the middle of taking fire, while you were treating Rivera." "Yes." "You compensated for wind and elevation on moving targets at 200 plus meters without a spotter." "Yes." "And you put 7 rounds into 7 separate concealed positions in under, what was it, 12 minutes 11? 47 seconds, she said. He stopped walking, just for a step. Then he caught back up. 47 seconds. From first to last, the gaps between were positioning and identification, not engagement time. He was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. She counted. He was a man who thought carefully before he spoke, which she respected, and he was a man who, when he arrived at a conclusion, stated it directly, which she respected even more. "You're not a comms tech," he said. She kept walking. "I'm attached as a comms tech." "That's a different statement." She didn't answer. "Heart." His voice was still low, but it had a weight to it and now that hadn't been there before. Not anger, something more complicated. "I sent you back, twice. You told me what was coming, and I sent you back. You made the call you had the information to make," she said. "That's not your fault." Rivera took a round through his shoulder. "Rivera's alive," she said, "and he's walking, and we're 2 kilometers from our objective with a full team. That's where we are. That's what matters." She heard him exhale. It was the sound of a man letting go of something he was going to pick back up later when there was time for it. She understood that completely. 30 meters ahead of them, Walker was moving with purpose, his rifle up his head on a swivel. He was recalibrating on the move the way good commanders did, folding new information into the operational picture without stopping to argue with it. She watched his posture and thought, he's already decided. Whatever he decided about me in the last 15 minutes, he's decided it. The corridor opened up at the 0238 mark, and the column spread out into broader terrain, and the immediate pressure of the engagement zone released. She felt it in her shoulders, the physical relaxation of moving from a position of geometric disadvantage back into space where options existed. Okafor materialized at her left shoulder. She had noticed him doing this, gravitating toward her since the 3-kilometer mark of the original push. He was 20 steps behind her, then 15, then 10, and then he was beside her, and she let him be, because she understood what he needed, and because she was privately glad to have someone beside her who wasn't calculating what category to put her in. "Ma'am," he said. "Still not ma'am," she said. "Sorry, Hart." He paused. "Are you okay?" She considered the question for a genuine moment. "Yes," she said. "You sure? Because you just..." He gestured back toward the corridor with a vague, encompassing movement. "That was..." "It was," she agreed. "I've never seen anything like that. I didn't even know..." He stopped, restarted. "I didn't know a person could do that." She glanced at him sideways. He was 19 and he was trying very hard to be a ranger. And tonight he had done exactly what she told him to do without asking for a reason, which had probably kept him from taking a round in the first 90 seconds of contact. She felt something about that she did not name. "You did well," she said. He blinked. "I didn't do anything." "You did exactly what I told you. In the middle of a contact, under fire from someone with no rank on her sleeve and no explanation for why she was telling you anything. That's not nothing. That's actually fairly hard." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I believed you." "I know," she said. That helped. They moved in silence for a while after that. The mountain around them was still and cold, and the stars above were hard and clear, and somewhere 2 kilometers ahead was a communications hub that 11 rangers and 1 woman who was not what she said she was had come here to destroy. 0247 hours. Walker called a halt at a natural choke point 400 meters from the objective and pulled the team into a tight perimeter. Elena moved to the front automatically without being asked, and nobody stopped her. She crouched beside Walker and Tate and Chen, and when Walker spread the satellite imagery on the ground between them, she looked at it the way she had been looking at terrain her entire adult life, not as a flat image, but as a three-dimensional problem with variables. Hubs dug in, Walker said. Fortified position, 2 visible entry points from the aerial guard rotation is off, Elena said. Walker looked at her. What? The guard rotation intel was based on signals intercept from 72 hours ago. They rotated the schedule when they set the ambush. They knew we were coming, which means they anticipated a strike on the hub. They would not leave the hub on its original security rotation if they knew we were coming for it. Walker stared at the image. You're saying the approach vectors are going to be covered differently than the intel shows. I'm saying the entire site security posture is probably different. They planned this as a 2-stage operation. The ambush was first, the hub was always second. If the ambush succeeded, they'd be relaxed at the hub. If it failed, they'd be ready for us, Chen finished. Yes. Walker looked at the image for a long time. He looked like a man doing a very specific kind of math, the kind where you weigh the intelligence you have against the intelligence you don't have and make the best decision available. Knowing the best available is not the same as the right one. Options, he said, and he said it to Elena. She noted that. She did not comment on it. We can't hit both entry points simultaneously with 10 mobile bum, she said. Not with 2 limited. What we can do is create a diversion at the secondary entry point, enough noise and movement to pull security attention, while a small element goes through the primary. Fast, hard, objective, focused. She paused. The diversion element takes the most risk. They're going to draw fire. Who leads the primary? Walker asked. You, she said. You take the primary with Chen and 4 others. Light fast, you hit the hub direct. She paused again. I'll run the diversion. Tate looked at her. By yourself. I'll take 2. You'll take 4, Walker said. She looked at him. 4 is too many for the diversion element to be mobile enough to... 4, he repeated. His voice had the particular quality of a decision already made. Lawson Santos, you're with Hart. Okafor, you too. Lawson looked like he wanted to say something. He did not say it. Whatever he had been going to say had apparently lost its footing somewhere in the last 40 minutes. Okafor just said, yes, sir, immediately, which made Elena think again that he was going to be fine, this kid. She looked at Walker. Timeline, 20 minutes. You hit the diversion position and draw fire. The moment they commit attention to you, we go through the primary. 20 minutes, she said. Understood. She turned to the 4 men assigned to her. Lawson wouldn't meet her eyes, which she interpreted as the particular discomfort of someone who owed an apology they didn't know how to formulate. Santos was solid. She had watched him move under fire, and he had good instincts and didn't panic. Okafor was Okafor. She had made her assessment of him 30 minutes ago, and it had not changed. Listen to me, she said to the 4 of them, and she said it quietly, but she did not soften it. The diversion is not a suicide mission. It is a controlled draw. We move to position, we make enough noise and motion to be credible, and when Walker's element engages the primary, we shift to support fire, and then we pull back. We do not advance on the secondary position. We do not try to take it. We create chaos and we survive it. Are we clear? 3 nods. Lawson's came a half second behind the others. Lawson, she said. He looked at her. Are we clear? Clear, he said. His voice was flat and did not carry any of the particular quality it had carried when he called her comms girl in a corridor 4 kilometers back. Good enough, she thought. 02:59 hours. They moved to position in 8 minutes. Elena kept the element tight and quiet using the natural terrain features she had been reading since the approach. Not the features the map showed, but the ones the map didn't show. The ones she had filed away during the push, as useful, the ones that a trained eye picked up automatically and a trained body moved toward without conscious direction. She put Okafor on the left, Santos on the right, Lawson behind her. She took the lead. The secondary entry point of the hub was below and to the left approximately 120 meters. She could see the guard positions from here, 2 of them, which was different from the intelligence files 3, which told her the guard rotation had shifted exactly as she had predicted, and the original intel was already compromised. She clocked the sight lines. She clocked the fields of fire. She built the engagement picture in her mind completely. Not just the next 30 seconds, but the 3 minutes after that, the likely response pattern, the probable direction of reinforcement movement when the primary breach happened. Contact on my mark, she said. Controlled burst to the left of the secondary position. We want movement and noise. We want their heads to come up. We do not want to take the position. Mark in 45 seconds. She looked at her watch. She counted down. Her breathing was steady and her hands were steady, and the part of her that had been dormant for 2 years was now fully, completely, entirely online, and she was going to have to think about what that meant later. But right now it was 45 seconds and counting, and she had 4 men behind her and a job to do. 15 seconds, Lawson said quietly. Hard. She didn't turn. What? He paused, then, I was wrong about you earlier. Another pause. I wanted to say that before later, she said. 10 seconds. She felt him nod behind her. 5 seconds. She raised the SR-25. She looked through the scope. She picked her mark. The mark was not a person. She had a clear shot on both guards, 200 meters favorable angle conditions. She had worked in worse than this. She did not take those shots. She put her round into the ground 20 feet to the left of the secondary position, and Santos and Okafor lit up the area around it with controlled bursts. And the guards reacted exactly as the geometry predicted, moving right away from the fire, pulling additional security in the same direction their radios going up. Their attention committed to the secondary point. Walker's element hit the primary 30 seconds later. She heard it. She didn't see it. She was watching the secondary position and adjusting her team's fire pattern to maintain the pressure without escalating it. But she heard the hard, fast sound of a primary breach, and she counted the seconds, and she tracked the commotion moving inside the hub from the audio signature of it. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Then Walker's voice on the radio. Primary secured, hub down, exfil in 10. She put her hand up. Cease fire, we pull back. Left then, left again back to the rally point. Move. They moved. All 4 of them. No one left behind, no one hit. At the rally point, Walker looked at her and she looked at Walker, and something passed between them that was not a conversation and not a salute, and not any of the formal things that happen between a captain and a specialist in a unit where those categories actually meant what they were supposed to mean. It was something older than rank. It was recognition. She looked away first because she knew that if she held that look too long, she was going to have to start answering questions she hadn't decided to answer yet. And there was still a 6-kilometer extraction through compromised terrain between this moment and the base, and that required her full attention. 0318 hours, extraction began. She moved mid-column again, the same position she had held during the original push. The same radio pack on her back. The same sidearm on her hip. The SR-25 was back with Tate, but nothing else was the same. The Rangers around her moved differently now. Not in formation, but in orientation, subtly, instinctively, the way people orient towards something without consciously deciding to. She noticed it in the first kilometer of the extraction, the slight adjustment of spacing that kept her in sight of the men ahead and behind. The way Tate moved not in front of her or behind her, but to her right half a step back in the position you take when you're covering someone you've decided that matters. She noticed it. She didn't comment on it. She wasn't ready for what commenting on it would require her to say. At the 2-kilometer mark of the extraction, Chen came alongside her again. He had been quiet since the debrief at the rally point. She had watched him processing in that careful, systematic way. He did everything, and she had given him the space for it. 47 seconds, he said. You said that already, she said. I keep saying it because I keep not quite believing it. And then I remember Rivera's shoulder and Burke's leg, and I believe it again. He paused. I should have listened to you at the 2-kilometer mark on the push in. Yes, she said. He looked at her sideways. You're not going to tell me it's all right. No, she said, because 2 men took wounds that might not have happened if the column had halted and we'd had a conversation about what I was seeing. I'm not going to tell you that's all right because it isn't. But I'm also not going to tell you it was reckless or stupid because it wasn't. You made the call with what you had. I didn't give you enough to make a different call. Why not, he said. Why didn't you give me more? She was quiet for a moment. The mountain moved past them, cold and dark stars hard overhead. Because what I would have had to give you, she said finally, was more than I was ready to give. He let that sit. He was a man who understood when a statement was a door that was not yet open, and he did not push it. Walker's going to have questions, he said, at debrief. I know. So will command. I know. Are you going to answer them? She thought about that, about what answering them meant, about the 2 years she had spent constructing the version of herself that didn't have to answer them, about the particular irony of the fact that she had come up this mountain as a communications specialist and was going back down it as something else entirely, and she hadn't had a choice about that transition from the moment the mountain went quiet and she started counting. Some of them, she said. Chen made the sound that was his version of a nod. They walked in silence after that, and the extraction moved and the mountain let them go. She did not look back at the corridor. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was up there. 7 positions, 7 shots, 47 seconds. And 2 years of running ended in less than a minute on a ridge she had never been on before. The base appeared ahead. Lights through the dark, and the column moved toward it, and Elena Hart moved with it, and for the first time in a long time, the weight she was carrying did not feel like something she was hiding from. It felt like something she was carrying, which was different, which was harder, she was beginning to think the only honest way to carry it. Okafor fell into step beside her for the last 500 meters. He didn't say anything. He just walked next to her with his rifle across his chest and his 19-year-old face pointed toward the lights ahead, and the silence between them was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. That helped too. The debrief room at FOB Serpent smelled like cold coffee and something nobody was saying. Walker sat at the head of the table. Chen to his right, Tate across from Chen. Rivera was in medical with his arm in a sling and a look on his face that the medic described as extremely unhappy but physically stable. Burke was 2 beds down with his leg elevated and a paperback he wasn't reading propped on his chest. The rest of the team filled the remaining chairs in various states of post-operation stillness, that particular condition where the body has stopped moving but the mind has not yet received the message. Elena sat at the far end of the table. She had her hands flat on the surface in front of her. Her radio pack was leaned against the wall behind her. She had not been given a chair at the center of the table. She had taken the one at the end because it was the one that gave her a clear line of sight to the door, which was not a conscious choice so much as a habit she had never successfully broken. The room was quiet for about 4 seconds after Walker closed the door. Then he said, "Start from the beginning." She looked at him. Which beginning? Whichever one explains tonight. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. She thought about the version of this conversation she had rehearsed at approximately never, because she had spent 2 years constructing a life in which this conversation would never be necessary, and the mountain had taken that construction apart in 47 seconds. "My name is Elena Hart," she said. "Specialist communications, that part is accurate. What is also accurate is that before communications I held a different designation. Operator 12, assigned to a classified program within the Ranger Regiment, a precision marksmanship initiative that was never publicly acknowledged and no longer officially exists." The room did not move. Walker said, "How long?" 6 years in the program, 98 confirmed long-range engagements, instructor certification in advanced marksmanship and sniper doctrine. I trained 4 of the 12 operators who came through the program after my cohort. Chen said nothing. He was looking at the table. Tate said 98. "Confirmed," she said. There were others that weren't officially logged. Lawson, who was sitting 2 chairs down from Tate, had not said a word since the extraction rally point. He was looking at Elena with an expression that she could only describe as the face of a man actively reconstructing his own recent history and not finding the new version comfortable. She didn't hold that against him. It was an honest reaction. Walker leaned forward. His elbows went to the table and his hands came together, and he looked at her with the specific focus of a man who has decided to hear everything and evaluate nothing until all of it is on the table. "Why communications?" he said. That was the question. That had always been the question. She had been waiting for it for 2 years in the abstract and for the last 4 hours in the specific, and she had not decided until this moment exactly how much of the answer she was going to give. She gave all of it. 2 years ago, she said, Operation Greyline, classified so I won't give you details you don't have clearance for. What I will tell you is that my team was extracting through a mountain corridor not entirely unlike tonight's terrain. There was an enemy sniper in a position that our intel had not flagged. A hidden position. Good concealment. I had a window brief, clean sufficient. She stopped. Her hands on the table were completely still. "I missed," she said. The words sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I missed, she said again more quietly. In 6 years and 98 confirmed engagements, I had never missed a clean shot in a live operation. And the one time I did the round, that I should have fired and didn't fire in time, that round came from the enemy position instead. And it hit my spotter. Tate said very quietly, your spotter. My brother, she said, Daniel Hart. Corporal, same program 2 years behind me. He was 24 years old. Nobody said anything. She did not need them to say anything. She had not said it to get a response. She had said it because Walker had asked for the beginning, and that was where the beginning actually was, and she was done with the version of herself that located the beginning somewhere more convenient. He survived, she said, which is the part that doesn't make it simpler. He survived with a traumatic brain injury and partial hearing loss in his left ear, and he lives in Portland now with their mother, and he is alive, which is everything, and I still cannot pick up a scope without hearing the sound of the shot that should have been mine. Walker let the silence hold for a moment. Then, so you buried yourself in communications. I requested a transfer. Command approved it. I don't think they knew what to do with an operator who was requesting out of a classified program voluntarily, and the easiest resolution was to move me laterally. She paused. I was good at communications. I had always been good at the technical side, and it kept me in the field and without having to be what you actually are, Chen said. She looked at him. He was looking at the table, but he said it without accusation, which she appreciated. Yes, she said. Walker sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not dramatically, just the way a man looks at the ceiling when he is thinking and needs somewhere to put his eyes while he does it. Then he looked back at her. Tonight, he said. Why tonight? You've been on operations before. Why engage tonight when you've been in the field for 2 years without? Because tonight was different, she said. Tonight they were going to die. She said it plainly. No performance in it. Just the flat arithmetic of what she had calculated in the corridor and what the calculation had demanded of her. I've been on operations where the risk was high and the outcome was uncertain, and I have stayed in my lane because the lane was sufficient. Tonight it was not sufficient. Tonight, 7 men had prepared a perfect kill zone and 12 Rangers walked into it without the ability to find a single one of those shooters, and I ran the numbers, and the numbers said that, without a change in the variable set, this column did not make it out of that corridor. She paused. I could change the variable set. I had the ability to change it, and I chose to use it. You chose, Walker said, not questioning it, just naming it. Yes, she said, I chose. There was a silence that was different from the silences before it. Less about shock and more about reckoning. She could feel the room recalibrating around her. Not one person's recalibration, but 11 people's, simultaneously, each of them revising the mental file they had built on her across the course of the last 8 hours, from the briefing room to the corridor to the hub to this table. It was Lawson who broke it. She had not expected that. The brass, he said, at the 2-kilometer mark. You saw it. Yes. I walked past it, he said. You weren't looking for it, she said. You were. She looked at him. His voice was not defensive, and it was not apologetic exactly. It was the voice of someone trying to understand something by tracing it backward from the result to the cause. I'm always looking for it, she said. I never stopped. That was the thing I couldn't actually turn off no matter how hard I tried. The reading, the calculation, the way terrain speaks if you've been trained to listen to it long enough. I could stop pulling a trigger. I could stop calling myself an operator. But I could not stop seeing what I see when I walk into a mountain. She paused. Tonight that was useful. Tonight it was the difference, Tate said. She didn't answer that, not because it wasn't true, but because agreeing with it out loud felt like more than she was ready to claim. 4 12 hours. The debrief broke and the Rangers dispersed towards sleep or food, or the particular post-operation decompression that every soldier managed in their own specific way. Walker asked her to stay. She stayed. When the room was empty except for the 2 of them, he put a folder on the table in front of her, and she looked at it without touching it. Command is going to want a full report, he said. What happened on the ridge, your identity, your background, all of it. I know, she said. They're going to want to know why a classified operator has been operating as a comms tech for 2 years without reinstatement proceedings. I know. They're also going to want to know, he said more carefully, how a comms specialist ends up attached to a Ranger direct action element on a classified strike mission. She looked at him. That was the question she had been sitting with since the extraction. Not the obvious questions about her capabilities or her history, but the operational question, how had she been there? She had been attached to the element at command level, not at Walker's request, not through standard personnel allocation. She had been placed specifically on this team for this mission, and she had not known that when she was briefed, and she was beginning to understand that she should have asked sooner why. "Who attached me to your element?" she said. Walker picked up a page from inside the folder and put it in front of her. It was an attachment order. Standard formatting, standard headers. The unit code at the bottom was classified. The name in the authorizing field was a name she recognized. Colonel James Hart. No relation. But a name she knew from a different context, a classified context, a context that belonged to the program she had left and the version of herself she had been trying not to be for 2 years. She looked at Walker. "He knew," she said. "The colonel attached you to this element 6 days before the mission," Walker said. "The intelligence about the communications hub that came from the same source that generated the mission order. I think," he said carefully, "that the intelligence was generated specifically to create this mission." She sat with that for a moment. "He sent me here on purpose," she said. "He knew the ridge was compromised. He knew what was waiting in that corridor. I think he knew the threat profile was significantly higher than the mission brief indicated. Yes. He sent 12 Rangers and 1 covert operator into a kill zone." Walker was quiet. "Why?" she said. It came out harder than she intended. The flat calm she had been maintaining across the entire debrief developed a cracked brief and contained, and she pressed it closed before it could go further. "Why would he send?" "Because he needed you to engage," Walker said. "Because whatever you are in the program database, officially you've been designated inactive for 2 years. And there are people in command, I don't know who, I don't know all of it, who need to know if Operator 12 is still operational." The crack opened again. She let it. "He used your team," she said. "He used my team," Walker confirmed. His voice was entirely level. It was the voice of a man who had arrived at this conclusion some time ago and had already done the emotional work of it and was now in the factual phase. "Rivera's shoulder, Burke's leg. That's the price of his test." He paused. "I'm going to be having a very direct conversation with Colonel Hart." She looked at the attachment order on the table in front of her. She thought about 6 days of planning, about the specific callousness of engineering an operation around the hypothesis that one woman's survival instinct would override 2 years of voluntary suppression, about Rivera on the ground in the corridor with his hand pressed to his own shoulder, and the shot that put him there, which had been a deliberate condition of someone's operational calculus. She felt something that was different from the operational clarity of the corridor, something warmer and harder. "He wasn't wrong," she said. Walker looked at her. "About the result," she said. "He calculated that I would engage. He was right. That doesn't make it acceptable, but it means his data was accurate." She pushed the attachment order back toward Walker. "I engaged because your team was going to dig. That would have been true regardless of whether Colonel Hart engineered it. The mountain was real. The shooters were real. The 47 seconds were real." She met Walker's eyes. "He used your team, and I am not going to pretend that is anything other than what it is. But I am also not going to pretend that being used changes what I did or why I did it." Walker held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of a man who has heard something he disagrees with and respects at the same time. "What do you want to do?" he said. She had not expected that question either. He kept asking her questions she hadn't prepared for. "About what?" she said. "About who you are," he said. "About what comes next. Command is going to offer reinstatement, full reactivation. Operator 12 back in the program. That's almost certainly coming," he paused. "Is that what you want?" She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She thought about Daniel in Portland, with their mother and the hearing loss in his left ear, and the fact that he was alive, which was everything, and the fact that she had spent 2 years carrying that like a debt that could never be fully paid, and had still, when the corridor closed and the numbers came up wrong, picked up a rifle and done the thing that the debt was supposedly preventing her from doing. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the 7 positions on the ridgeline and the 47 seconds, and the fact that her hands had been completely steady through all of it. She thought about Okafor at 19 years old walking beside her for the last 500 meters of the extraction without saying a word in the particular kind of company that was. I don't know yet, she said, which was the most honest answer she had ever given to that question. Walker accepted it. He closed the folder and he stood, and he held out his hand across the table, and she looked at it for a half second before she understood what he was offering, and then she stood and she took it. His grip was firm and brief and entirely unambiguous. For the record, he said, my team is alive because of you, all of them. That's the only thing I'm reporting to command whatever else they want to know about Operator 12 or Colonel Hart or the rest of it. My team is alive. She held his gaze. Yes, she said, they are. He left. She sat back down. The room was quiet around her, and she let it be quiet. She put her hands flat on the table, and she looked at the wall, and she let herself feel fully and without containment what she had been holding at operational distance for the last several hours. The corridor, the shots, the weight of the SR-25 in her hands, familiar as a word in her first language. The crack in the 2 years of careful, deliberate construction that she had built around herself, and the fact that the crack was now large enough to see through clearly. She had told herself she was no longer a sniper. She had told herself she was communications support attached personnel, not a threat, not a fighter. The mountain had not accepted that version of events, and somewhere in the last 8 hours she had stopped pretending it had. 0451 hours. She was still at the table when Okafor knocked on the open door. He was holding 2 cups of coffee with the careful attention of someone carrying something that matters, and he stopped in the doorway and said, "Is this okay?" She looked at him. "Come in, Okafor." He came in and put one of the cups in front of her and sat down 2 chairs away. Not at the far end of the table, not right next to her, but close enough to be present and far enough to give her room. She noticed that. It was a thoughtful piece of spatial reasoning for a 19-year-old. She picked up the coffee. "You doing okay?" he said. "You keep asking me that," she said. "You keep looking like someone who needs to be asked," he said. She looked at him over the cup. He met her eyes with a directness that didn't flinch, and she thought again what she had thought in the corridor: smart kid, exceptional situational awareness, the kind of innate people reading that couldn't be taught, only developed. "I'm processing," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway," she said. He almost smiled. "Your brother, did he come back from it?" She was quiet for a moment. "He's alive," she said. "He has deficits. He's managing them." She paused. "He lives in Portland. He has a Dunboyne. He calls me on Sundays usually." "Do you talk to him often?" "On Sundays," she said. "Usually." Okafor nodded. He looked at his coffee. "Does he know what you do? What you did up there?" "He knows what I am," she said. "He always knew. He's the only person who always knew, even when I was pretending otherwise." She stopped. "He told me the last time we talked that I should stop pretending, that it was making me smaller than I was." She felt something move in her chest. "I told him I would think about it." "That was before tonight," Okafor said. "Yes," she said. "That was before tonight." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think he was right." She looked at the 19-year-old sitting across from her with his coffee cup and his direct brown eyes and his absolute unperformed sincerity, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, not resolution, something more like the first breath after a very long time underwater. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think so too." The bass was beginning to shift around them. The first sounds of the morning cycle beginning. Generators adjusting, voices in the distance, the ordinary operational noise of a forward base coming back online. She sat with her coffee, and she sat with what she had decided because she had decided it, she realized somewhere in the last hour, without calling it a decision. She was not running anymore. Whatever came next, the command conversations, the reinstatement questions, Colonel Hart and his operational calculus, the program, and its demands and its particular cost, she was going to face it as what she was. Not as a communications specialist. Not as a woman carrying something she was pretending didn't define her, as Elena Hart. Operator 12, 98 confirmed. 47 seconds on a ridge in the dark. the ghost who had finally stopped running from her own name. The call from Colonel James Hart came at 0630 hours. Elena was still in the debrief room when Walker's radio crackled with the summons, and she knew before Walker said the name, who it was, and what it was about. There was a particular quality to the silence that preceded a conversation you had been building toward for 2 years, a pressure almost physical, the same pressure she felt on the ridge before a target acquired. She had learned to read that pressure accurately. Walker looked at her across the table. "You don't have to be in this conversation." "Yes, I do," she said. She stood. She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, set it back down. "Where?" "Command tent, 5 minutes." She got there in 3. Colonel James Hart was not what most people expected when they imagined the man who ran a classified precision marksmanship program. He was 61 years old, slight, with close-cropped gray hair, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong word in the wrong moment cost lives. He had a file open on the table in front of him when she walked in, and he didn't look up immediately, which she recognized as a deliberate choice. She sat down across from him and waited. He looked up. His eyes were the specific kind of assessing that she associated with people who had been reading operators for so long that they did it automatically the way she read terrain. "Operator 12, he said. "Colonel," she said. 47 seconds, he said. 7 positions, all confirmed eliminated, no friendly fatalities. 2 wounded, she said. He nodded. "Rivera and Burke, both will return to full duty within 6 to 8 weeks. He closed the file. "You performed exactly as projected." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees in the space of a breath. "Projected," she said. "The operation was designed with multiple outcome scenarios," he said. "The highest probability scenario involved you engaging within the first 60 seconds of active contact. You engaged in the first 47. He said it with the flat precision of someone reading actuarial data. The sniper ring was genuine. The threat was genuine. I want to be clear about that. Those 7 shooters would have killed every man in that column if you had not acted. That is not a variable I manufactured. But the mission was, she said, the mission was real. The intelligence was real. The hub was a legitimate target and has been neutralized." He paused. The composition of the element was deliberate, yes. Walker, standing to her left, made a sound. It was a controlled sound, the sound of a man who had promised himself he would stay operational in this conversation and was finding that promise somewhat taxing. "You sent my people in as a test condition," Walker said. His voice was entirely even. What she had learned was when Walker was at his most dangerous. Hart looked at him. "I sent your people in on a real mission with a real threat and an additional variable that significantly improved their survival probability. The alternative was sending them in without that variable." "The alternative was accurate intelligence," Walker said. "The alternative was accurate intelligence that would have caused the element to request a different approach and the mission to be scrubbed," Hart said. "The hub needed to come down. It came down." He looked back at Elena, and Operator 12 is back online. Both outcomes were necessary. Elena had been listening to this exchange with the particular patience of someone who had already completed this argument internally and arrived at a position. She let Hart finish. Then she said, "You could have asked me." Hart looked at her. "Would you have come back voluntarily?" She held his gaze for a long time. The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that she had spent 2 years building a version of herself that did not have to answer that question. And if Hart had called her directly and said, "Operator 12, we need you back," she would have declined and found a way to make the decline stick. She knew that. He knew that. Walker probably knew that too. "No," she said. "No," he agreed, "which is why I didn't ask." "That doesn't make it right," she said. "No, he said. "It doesn't." The admission landed without ceremony. He said it the way he said everything, flatly, precisely, without the emotional softening that would have made it easier to dismiss. He was not apologizing. He was not defending. He was acknowledging the arithmetic of what he had done and declining to pretend the arithmetic was clean. She respected that even as she held on to the anger at Rivera's shoulder and Burke's leg and 12 men walking into a corridor that was built to kill them. "What do you want from me?" she said. He opened the file again and slid a single page across the table. It was a reinstatement order, full reactivation, Operator 12 active designation, classified program, all previous credentials restored. She looked at it without touching it. The program needs you, he said. Not the file, you. There are 4 operators currently in advanced training who are technically proficient and operationally limited because the person who should be instructing them has been carrying a radio pack for 2 years. He paused. Your brother's injury was not your fault. The shot you didn't take was not a failure of skill. It was a failure of time, and time is not something that skill controls. She looked at him. That's not the after-action review, he said. The full classified review, which I have read and which you have not because you requested a transfer before the review was completed. The review found that the target acquisition window was 0.4 of a second. Your documented acquisition to fire average across 98 engagements is zero point 0.6 seconds. The window was not survivable. Not for you, not for any operator in the program. The shot was not makeable in the time available. The room was very quiet. She had not known that. She had spent 2 years carrying a weight that was built on a version of events that was not accurate. She had built the entire architecture of her withdrawal, the communications transfer, the radio pack, the deliberate suppression of everything. She was on the premise of a miss. On the premise that she had failed when she should have succeeded. On the premise that her brother's injury was the direct result of a shot she should have taken and didn't, and the shot had not been makeable. She sat with that for a moment. It was not a small moment. It was the kind of moment where the entire load-bearing structure of a belief you have organized your life around gets a single beam removed, and you feel the shift in everything that was resting on it. Walker was watching her. She was aware of him watching her, and she was grateful for the fact that he said nothing. Why didn't anyone tell me, she said. Her voice was level. It was the most effort she had spent on level in the last 8 hours. You were gone before the review was complete, Hart said, and then you were in communications, and the review is classified, and the file says you requested transfer voluntarily, and so command assumed you had been informed and had made a personal decision. He paused. I should have ensured you received the full findings. That is a failure I own. 2 admissions in 10 minutes from Colonel James Hart. She filed that under events she had not anticipated. She looked at the reinstatement order. She thought about Daniel in Portland. She thought about the Sunday calls. She thought about what he had said, stop pretending it is making you smaller. And she thought about the moment last night in the quarter when she stopped pretending and what had happened in the 47 seconds after that. She thought about Okafor at 19 carrying 2 cups of coffee with the careful attention of someone carrying something that mattered. She picked up the reinstatement order. She read it. She put it back on the table. I have conditions, she said. Hart waited. Walker's element, she said. I stay attached. Not officially, I understand the classification requirements, but operationally, when they go into the field, I go with them. Walker made a sound that was different from the earlier sound. This one was quieter and had a different quality to it. Hart said that's an unconventional request for an operator in a precision program. I'm an unconventional operator, she said. You built the program that way. You know who I am. She paused. I work better with people I know, and they work better with me in the field. Last night proved that. I'm not going back to being a ghost in a training facility. I will instruct. I will run evaluations. I will do whatever the program needs, but I stay in the field with this team. Hart looked at Walker. Walker looked at Hart with the expression of a man who had already decided and was simply waiting for the formal conversation to catch up. Agreed, Hart said. One more condition, she said. Go ahead. Rivera and Burke, she said. Au revoir. Full medical support, full recovery time, no operational pressure on their return timelines. They took those wounds as a condition of your scenario. Their recovery is on the program's account. Hart nodded once. Done. She looked at the reinstatement order. She thought about whether she needed to say anything else. She decided she didn't. She picked up a pen from the table and she signed it. 7:18 hours. The base was fully awake when she came out of the command tent. Morning light, the operational noise of a forward installation running at full tempo, the smell of food from the mess area and diesel from the vehicle compound. She stood for a moment outside the tent and let the morning be the morning. Walker came out behind her. He stood beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment, then field attached. Yes, she said. Command is going to have opinions about that. They can have them, she said. I've met their opinions. I find them manageable. He made the sound that she was beginning to understand was his version of a laugh. Brief, controlled, entirely genuine. Hart's going to call it a pilot program or something. Find a way to make it fit the organizational chart. That's his problem, she said. My problem is the next mission. He looked at her sideways. You already want the next mission. I want to know the team is covered, she said. That's different. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, is it? She thought about that, about the distinction between wanting to be operational and wanting these specific people to be okay. About whether those were separable things or whether they had been the same thing from the moment she moved toward Rivera in the first seconds of contact in the corridor. Maybe not entirely, she said. 800 hours. She called Daniel from a satellite phone in the communications tent. She had used that tent for 2 years without ever calling her brother from it. She dialed his number and he picked up on the third ring, which was 2 rings sooner than he usually picked up on Sundays, and then she remembered it was not Sunday. Elena, he said. He said her name the way he always said it, without surprise, without the particular caution that most people applied when they didn't know what emotional state they were calling into. Just her name straightforward, like a door opened from the inside. Hey, she said. You're calling on a Thursday. I know. A pause. She could hear him adjusting the small sounds of someone putting down whatever they were holding and giving the call their full attention. You okay? Yes, she said. Then something happened. I'm listening, he said. She told him, not the classified details, not the specific grid coordinates, or the program designation or Colonel Hart's name, but the shape of it. The corridor and the 7 shooters and the 47 seconds and the thing she had been trying not to be for 2 years, reasserting itself in the dark on a ridge when the numbers came out wrong. He listened without interrupting. Daniel had always been a good listener. It was part of why he had been a good spotter. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You signed the reinstatement. This morning, she said. Good, he said. It came out immediately and without complication, which was so purely Daniel that she felt something in her chest tighten and release at the same time. The review, she said, the after action, Hart showed me the findings. The window was 0.4 of a second. He was quiet. You knew, she said. I knew, he said. You knew and you didn't tell me. I tried, he said, the first 3 months. You wouldn't talk about it. And then you were gone, and by the time you were somewhere I could reach you, you had built the whole thing, the communications cover, the whole structure, and I could see that you needed it. You needed to not be that person for a while. I didn't want to take that away from you before you were ready. She pressed her hand flat against the table in the communications tent and looked at the wall and breathed for a moment. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said. I should have. I'm sorry. She sat with that. She sat with the 2 years and the weight she had been carrying and the 0.4 of a second that she had not been given and the architecture of guilt that had been built on a foundation that was not accurate, and she let herself feel how much that had cost her, and then she let herself put it down. Not all of it, not cleanly. That was not how these things worked, and she knew it. But enough of it to breathe differently. The dog, she said. What's his name? He made a sound. Murphy, he said. You know his name. I've told you 6 times. I know, she said. I wanted to hear you say it. He said Murphy. And in the way he said it, she heard everything: the apartment in Portland, the Sunday mornings, the deficits he was managing, and the life he was building inside and around them, the specific, ordinary grace of a person who had been through something catastrophic and had found a way to remain themselves on the other side of it. She wanted to be that. She had wanted to be that for 2 years and had been going about it completely wrong. I'll call you Sunday, she said. I know you will, he said. Be careful. I will, she said. She put the phone down. 3 weeks later, the mission brief was for a ridge crossing in the Northern Operational Zone. 8 Rangers, 1 communications specialist, 1 attached personnel with no visible combat designation beyond a sidearm and a radio pack. The communications specialist was new. Her name was Rodriguez, and she was 23 years old and very good at her job. The attached personnel was Elena Hart. Walker gave the brief the same way he always gave briefs, standing arms crossed, eyes on the map, calculating variables. The team around the table was a mix of familiar and new. Chen on the right, Tate across from him, Okafor, who had been promoted since Korvac and wore it with the same unperformed directness. He wore everything. Lawson was there too. He had been different since the Ridge. Not dramatically different, not the kind of different that announced itself. Quieter, more deliberate. He listened to briefings differently now. He listened to people differently. She had noticed it and not said anything about it because some things were better received as weather than as comment. The new faces, 3 Rangers she hadn't operated with before, registered her the way the original team had registered her at the first briefing. Attached personnel, radio pack, sidearm, no rifle visible, not a fighter, not a threat, not someone who belonged on the front line. She watched them make the assessment and she said nothing. Walker finished the brief. He went over extraction routes, contingencies, communications, protocols. The new Rangers asked questions. Elena answered 2 of them briefly and precisely, and the new Rangers looked at Walker in the particular way of people who expected Walker to explain why the comms tech was answering tactical questions, and Walker did not explain. He just moved on. She had talked to him about that the week before, about whether she should say something at the brief, establish some context, give the new people a reference point that wasn't the visual of a woman with a radio pack. He had said why she had thought about it, so they know what to expect. They'll know what to expect, he said, when they need to know. Same way we did. She had thought about that for a moment. That's a somewhat expensive way to establish credibility. You established it in 47 seconds, he said. I'd say the price was reasonable. She had not had a good argument against that, so she had dropped it. The column moved out at 2100 hours under a moonless sky. The terrain on the northern ridge was different from Korvac, broader, more open, with less of the corridor geometry that had made Korvac so geometrically lethal. She read it automatically, cataloging features and angles, and the way the elevation changed, and she moved mid-column with her eyes up and her hands steady, and the part of her that had been fully online since Korvac remaining fully online without apology or concealment. Rodriguez, the new comms specialist, fell into step beside her at the 2-kilometer mark. She was 23 and professional and had the particular focused energy of someone who was good at their job and knew it without being obnoxious about it. She had been watching Elena for the first 2 kilometers with the controlled curiosity of someone who had heard something and was trying to square it with what she was seeing. You were on Korvac Ridge, Rodriguez said. She said it quietly, no inflection, not quite a question. Yes, Elena said. I heard about what happened there. A pause. Most of it is classified, obviously, but there's a version going around. There usually is, Elena said. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Then, are you actually a comms tech? Elena glanced at her sideways. I'm actually attached to this element, she said. Rodriguez nodded slowly. She was smart enough to hear the precision of that and not push past it. Okay, she said. You're good at your job, Elena said. It was not a deflection. She had been watching Rodriguez's protocols since the brief and the assessment was genuine. Rodriguez blinked slightly. Thank you. Stay close to the left wall when we enter the second narrowing at the 4-kilometer mark, Elena said. Rodriguez looked at her. Why? Because I'm telling you to, she said. And then more quietly, and because the left wall has better cover geometry if something changes. Rodriguez looked at her for a moment longer. Then she looked ahead at the trail and she adjusted her positioning toward the left side of the path. No more questions. At the 4-kilometer mark, nothing happened. The narrowing passed without incident, without contact, without the particular quality of silence that meant something was waiting. Elena tracked the terrain features and cataloged the angles and found nothing that required action, and they moved through and out the other side and the mission continued. Good. That was good. She had not been built for the hope that every mission ended in contact. She had been built for the hope that the people around her stayed alive, and tonight they were staying alive. And that was the entire purpose of every calculation she had ever run on every ridge she had ever walked. At the objective, Walker's element moved with the particular efficiency of a team that had been through something real together and had come out the other side still functional. She watched Okafor work precise, calm covering angles with an instinctive awareness of field geometry that she had seen developing over the last 3 weeks and which she had mentioned to Walker, who had mentioned it to Tate, who had started working with him on it. He was going to be exceptional. She was certain of that. The objective was secured in 11 minutes, no contact, clean. On the extraction at the 6-kilometer mark, she heard it. Not a shot, not a radio burst. A sound that was not part of the terrain, a microshift in the ambient frequency of the mountain, the particular asymmetric quiet that meant one specific kind of thing. She was already moving. She came out of the column low and fast, moving toward a rock formation on the right elevation, the SR-25 that Tate had started carrying, with the specific understanding that it was available to her when she needed it already in her hands, without her consciously deciding to take it. One position, single shooter, high right, 210 meters partial concealment behind a natural outcrop. She found the position in the scope. The shooter found her at the same moment. It was a fraction of a second decision. The entire arithmetic of it, elevation, wind distance, the specific angle of the hide, the partial exposure of the target, the fact that he was already acquiring compressed into something smaller than a breath. She fired. The mountain absorbed the report. She held the position in the scope for 2 full seconds. Then she lowered the rifle. Single shooter, she said. Right elevation, neutralized. The column was still. Then Chen said clear, and the column began to move again, and the extraction continued, and the mountain let them go exactly the way the mountain always let them go, when she was there to make sure it did. Walker fell back to walk beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, 210 meters, single shot. Yes, she said. You heard it, he said, before any of us. Yes, she said. What did you hear? She thought about how to explain it, about the micro shift and the asymmetric quiet and the biological thing that was not mystical but felt like it sometimes. About 6 years of training and 98 engagements and 47 seconds on Korvac Ridge, and 2 years of pretending none of it was there, and the way it had all been there anyway, every single moment waiting. The mountain changed, she said. When someone is on it who shouldn't be, it changes. You learn to hear the difference. He was quiet for a moment. Can you teach that? He said. She thought about the 4 operators in the program who needed an instructor. She thought about Okafor and his developing geometry. She thought about Rodriguez, 23 years old, already adjusting her position based on a recommendation she had received without explanation and followed on instinct. Yes, she said, you can teach it. It takes time, but you can teach it. He nodded. Good. They walked the last kilometer in the kind of silence that didn't need filling, and the base appeared ahead with its lights and its noise and its ordinary operational life, and the column moved toward it, and Elena Hart moved with it exactly where she was supposed to be. Back at the base when the gear was stowed and the debrief was logged, and the Rangers were dispersing toward food and sleep. Okafor found her in the communications tent. He was carrying coffee again. 2 cups, same careful attention. She looked at him. It's becoming a habit, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. She took the cup. Still not, ma'am. He sat down. He looked at her with the direct brown eyes that had been looking at her the same way since a dark corridor 3 weeks ago, when she told him to stay on the left wall, and he had done it without asking why. You heard it again tonight, he said, before any of us. Yes, she said. Is that something you're born with, or something you learn? She looked at her coffee. She thought about the questions seriously, the way she thought about all questions that deserved it. Both, she said. You start with something, and then you train it until it's completely different from what you started with, and you can't separate one from the other anymore. It just becomes what you are. He absorbed that. Is that what happened to you, Yo? Yes, she said. That's exactly what happened to me. He nodded slowly. Can I learn it? She looked at him. The 19-year-old who was now 20 and carried himself differently and covered his angles with a precision that was not accidental. The kid who had followed her instructions in a dark corridor without a reason and had been exactly where she needed him to be every time since. Yes, she said, you can learn it. He nodded. He drank his coffee. He didn't ask any more questions because he understood the way he always understood when the conversation had arrived at the thing it was actually about, and there was nothing more to add to it. She drank her coffee. Outside the base ran. The generators hummed. The night cycle of a forward operating installation continued its ordinary rhythm. Somewhere to the north, the ridge they had just walked was quiet and cold and entirely empty of threats. She had made sure of that. She called Daniel that Sunday. She told him about the northern ridge, the parts she could tell him, and about Rodriguez and the left wall and the single shooter at 210 meters, and he listened the way he always listened, without interruption, giving her the full weight of his attention across whatever distance separated them. When she finished, he said, You sound different. Different how, she said. Like yourself, he said. You sound like yourself. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about what it meant to sound like yourself after 2 years of sounding like someone else. About the particular quality of a voice when the person using it has stopped carrying something they were never supposed to be carrying and has picked up the thing that was always actually theirs. I am, she said. Good, he said. Murphy barked in the background. She smiled. She didn't know if Daniel could hear the smile from Portland, but she suspected he could. 3 days later, Walker posted the next mission brief. 12 Rangers, 1 communications specialist, 1 attached personnel. When the team assembled in the briefing room, the new faces did their assessment the same way new faces always did. Radio pack, sidearm, attached personnel, not a fighter, not a threat. Elena Hart stood at the far end of the table with her hands flat on the surface and her gray eyes reading the room the way she read everything, and she said nothing because she had learned that there was a version of invisibility that was not about hiding. It was about choosing when to appear. Somewhere on the next ridge there were threats she had not yet seen and angles she had not yet calculated, and the men around this table were going to walk into that terrain and they were going to come back out of it, every one of them, because she was going to be there. Not as a legend, not as a symbol, not as the woman who eliminated 7 snipers on Korvac Ridge in 47 seconds, though that was also true and would remain true regardless of what she called herself. As a protector, as a ghost who had stopped running from her own name and had decided instead to put it to use. The brief began. Walker started talking. Elena listened. And when the mission went into the field and the mountain changed the way mountains change when something wrong is waiting on them, one voice broke through the radio, silence calm and certain, and completely without hesitation. I've got him. 1 shot, clean, precise. A threat eliminated before anyone else had finished processing that the threat existed. The Rangers didn't question it. They didn't look for an explanation. They had stopped needing one 3 weeks ago on a ridge in the dark, and the understanding they had arrived at since then was not the kind that required words. They just said what they always said, now the way you say something that has become true enough to name. Ghost Sniper Online. And Elena Hart moved forward with her team, and the mountain went quiet around them, and every man on that ridge went home. That was the job. That was who she was. That was enough.